Boxie, Boxie. We're live. Hi, everybody. I'm Larry Harnisch. This is Boxie. Boxie is the Los Angeles County District Attorney's file in the Black Dahlia case. And this is the Ask Me Anything Black Dahlia case for October 2024. Welcome, as always. A couple of things before we get going. First of all, I always get trolls. So if I get a troll, I will report them. You report them too. And we'll just go on with that. Okay. Number one, first thing, Halloween is coming up. Don't dress up like the Black Dahlia for Halloween. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. It's not an homage. It's not a memorial, especially if you get all dressed up with your cheeks slashed and your forehead bashed. Don't do that. No, just don't do that. The only thing it is weird and gross. And if you want to be weird and gross, there are better ways to do it than dressing up like the actual victim of a horrible murder. If you want to wear vintage clothing as if you were a movie star of the 40s, something generic, that's fine. Just don't dress up like the Black Dahlia for Halloween, or really ever. Just don't do that. Okay. Dressing up like Boxie for Halloween. Well, it's an easy costume, that's for sure, right, Boxie? Yeah, I know. Okay. If you are new, I do an Ask Me Anything on the Black Dahlia case on the first Tuesday of the month. And I started doing that because I was sick and tired of the low quality of true crime programmers. TV shows, podcasts, what have you. I just got sick of it. When I started, I would talk to anybody with a microphone and a camera, but not anymore. And I mention this specifically because I got a couple of requests for interviews this week. I got a request from a TV show. I forget the name of the production company. It's on Discovery. They are doing some Black Dahlia show. I already told them no. I think the production company was called Ping Pong Video or something like that. And I said, no, I said, I don't want to be part of the true crime industrial complex. It is interesting that neither James Ellroy nor I discuss the Black Dahlia case anymore for very different reasons. But I don't do that. I may have to break my promise. I got a request from my former employer, the Los Angeles Times, to do an interview. And I said, well, I have to think about it. And it's like, yeah, okay. And I forgot to mention this Ask Me Anything. This is only Black Dahlia questions. No George Hodel, Steve Hodel questions. That's a whole nother session. I got so many that I do that. That will be October 29th. So no George Hodel, Steve Hodel questions, just Black Dahlia questions. Okay. Anyway. So I don't do interviews anymore, and I'm a lot happier. And that's the end of my rant on that. The true crime has gotten so sleazy. The people in it are just very shady. And I recently had some exposure to another highly rated somebody who hosts a very highly rated true crime podcast. And boy, it's just so shady. And if you're a fan of true crime podcasts, let me tell you, all those ads, they're making money. They're making coin on those true crime podcasts. Okay. The YouTube, Instagram folks, the YouTube channel is LM Harnisch. So it's youtube.com/LM Harnisch, which are my initials. Okay, so the way this works is I will talk for a little bit, and then I'll open it up to questions. And I'll alternate between the live questions on the chat and the ones that I've got have been submitted. And I will tell you now, I have got a ton of questions. I've got a ton of questions. I won't make them all. I won't get to them all. Okay. So first of all, book report. I am at 156,000 words as of Friday. That constitutes part one. Part one is the life of Elizabeth Short. That is pretty much done. I have to go back and write a section about Adrian West and Virginia West, but otherwise, that's done. And I am right now working on the crime scene investigation. And Finis Brown and Harry Hansen, the two lead detectives in the Black Dahlia case. And it's been interesting to go read some of their interrogations and contrast them with Frank Jimison. Who is Frank Jimison? Frank Jimison was the district attorney's investigator who did interviews and whatnot for the Los Angeles County grand jury. That's who Frank Jimison was. And he is all through here. And it's interesting to contrast his interviews and his interview techniques with those of the homicide detectives, which would be Harry Hansen and Finis Brown's older brother, Thad Brown. And what I have are, there was a guy named Otto Stephen Wilson, not real well known, but in 1944, he was going to sleazy bars in downtown Los Angeles, picking up women, taking them to cheap hotel rooms, and then killing them. And really grotesque, a couple of really grotesque killings. He killed two women and was arrested in a bar, probably as he was looking for his third victim. Anyway, I have the transcripts of those interrogations, and it's night and day difference between when you read like Frank Jimison's interviews with Red Manley or Antoth or some of these other people, and then read Misty. That's a great question. And then read how Hansen and Thad Brown and some of these other detectives. It's night and day. Boy, they really go after Otto Stephen Wilson, and he was executed. He was already imprisoned and executed. So that was the Otto Stephen Wilson. Grotesque killings. Okay, let's see here. Now, one of the things I want to talk about is, okay, I get this question a lot. I got this question a couple of times this week. If you could recommend one book on the Black Dahlia case, what would it be? None. People need to get over the idea that they can learn about the Black Dahlia case from a book. You cannot. None of the books that are out there, whether it's Severed or Daddy Was the Black Dahlia Killer or Black Dahlia Files, certainly not Black Dahlia Avenger or Red Rose, Black Dahlia, or whatever PUE. None of these books are at all trustworthy. You can't depend on any of them. People need to get over the idea that you can learn about the Black Dahlia case in a book. You can't. They're all just, if you read them, you will have to unlearn everything. And so people say, well, okay, you keep saying read the original clips. Yes, read the original clips. And why is that? Because at least the original clips are not trying to pin the killing on their dad or some other conveniently dead person. And, the websites are all terrible. Wikipedia is a mess. Don't read Wikipedia. Don't read Black Dahlia in Hollywood. Read the original clips. And somebody asked, well, okay, what about the LAPD files? Can I get them? No, you can't get the LAPD files. Yeah. The original newspaper clips from 1947, January to about March. Yeah, that's what you want to read. The LA papers, they're all online. You can read all of them. And if you do that, you will get a general kind of a working knowledge. The LAPD files are not available. There's a few things here or there that the LAPD has released over the years. The district attorney's files, Boxie here. I got Boxie. Boxie and I go way back. You can't get Boxie anymore. Boxie is a clone of the original files. and you can't get them anymore. What the district attorney, I'm told, does is you file a Freedom of Information Act request, and the district attorney, you send a blank CD, if you can find one, to the DA's office, and they send it back with the files. I'm told that's how it worked. I already had everything, so I didn't need to do that. But I will caution you now, if you didn't know anything about the Black Dahlia case and you got thrown this box, you would have a horrible time trying to sort it out. You already need a really good working knowledge of the Black Dahlia case before you could even begin to interpret Boxie. You really have to know who the heck everybody is, because otherwise it'll be what's going on here, what's happening. It's just, yeah. Go to the original the newspaper clippings from, as I said, January 1947 to about March. You don't need to go much past that, because the Dahlia case is somewhat superseded by Gene French. Gene French gets killed February 10th. And so then the newspapers are full of Gene French stories. And the Black Dahlia will surface from time to time in news coverage when there's another confession or something like that. But that will pretty much cover it. Okay. Let's see. Wikipedia. Oh, Wikipedia. I have things to say about Wikipedia. Now, I don't touch Wikipedia, except, and longtime followers know this, the only time I do an intervention with Wikipedia is when somebody adds or restores Jacob Edward Fisk. Yes, to the Black Dahlia suspects. Okay, there's an entry on Black Dahlia suspects, and somebody many, many years ago added Jacob Edward Fisk as a prank for one day, and it got deleted immediately. But every so often, somebody goes back and restores Jacob Edward Fisk. And so I finally put in, it's like, stop putting him back in. That's the only thing I do. But I do monitor the Wikipedia entries. And first of all, the George Hodel entry. A couple of people have been very, very naughty. They have not been good Wikipedians with the George Hodel article. First of all, Steve Hodel is once again, forget NPOV, forget conflict of interest. Steve Hodel is once again editing the George Hodel entry because, of course, he's Steve Hodel and he can do that. The other is somebody, and I know you're in Wiley, Texas, amigo, keeps putting me in weird mentions. Okay, don't do that. Okay, you leave when you make an entry in Wikipedia. You leave a trail of breadcrumbs. You leave your internet provider, and when you do that, you leave your internet provider to Wiley, Texas. So, person in Wiley, Texas, don't do that. Okay, be an adult with Wikipedia. Okay, I got an amazing question from, and I forget, it might have been on YouTube. It might have come in through YouTube. What about AI solving the Black Dahlia case? And it's like, are you kidding? Are you kidding? I mean, AI, if you haven't played with AI, so-called AI, large language modeling or whatever you want to call it, no. So-called artificial intelligence or machine learning, it's garbage in, garbage out. The only thing that's going to happen, and I recommend everybody experiment. Go ahead and experiment with AI. See how that works for you. My experience with AI has been that it's really, really stupid. And more important, you can't reproduce the results. It will give you a different answer every time. So that's kind of a problem. So no, I wouldn't even begin. To me, no. AI solving the Black Dahlia case? No. Okay, let's go to the live questions here. Eugene, you can dress up like Boxie. Send us a photograph. Misty, what is your opinion on her murder being part of a serial killer's spree? Okay, Black Dahlia was part of all these other murders. That is the common theory. And I will say this after studying lots of old vintage crimes. Unsolved murders exert a tremendous power on one another in the public imagination. What happens is all those little critical details that make them different kind of fall out. And so the public perception is that there's this mad serial killer who was one step ahead of the law, this criminal genius. And it's like, no, they're all different. The murder of Elizabeth Short is one of a kind. Gasp. Who says that? The original detective said that. I defer to Harry Hansen. Harry Hansen said the guy never killed before, he never killed again. It's a one of a kind. So that's, yeah. And I have no reason to contradict that. Makes perfect sense to me. So was it a serial killing? Was the murder of Elizabeth Short related to all these other that Steve Hodel calls the, he has this grab bag of dead women he calls the lone woman murder, and they're all different. He throws them all in the same, and of course they're all the work of his evil genius dad. Okay, enough about that. Did Mark Hansen tell Elizabeth to call when Ann Toth came back? Okay, what is that question about? In the last month of her life, Elizabeth Short went down to San Diego. She was there from early December to early January, and then she disappeared. Red Manley left Elizabeth Short at the Biltmore Hotel, and she was never, regardless of what other people say, she was never seen again. The original detectives could never figure out where she went. She called Mark, and who is Mark Hansen? Very briefly, Mark Hansen was a fellow in Hollywood, lived a block off Hollywood Boulevard, and she had stayed at his house a couple of times. She showed up with a roommate. She crashed there for a week or two, and then Mark Hansen threw them out. And then Elizabeth Short came back, and then he threw her out again. So when Elizabeth Short is down in San Diego, she contacted Mark Hansen, and she asked to come back to his house. And he told her no. What happened was Ann Toth, for you don't know, Ann Toth was another woman who was living at Mark Hansen's house, and she was up in the Bay Area for Christmas. It was Christmas holidays. And so supposedly Mark Hansen told Elizabeth Short that she could not come back to his house until Ann Toth returned from the Bay Area. And of course, he didn't know when she was coming back. The big question is whether Elizabeth Short contacted Mark Hansen once she got back to Los Angeles. And we really don't know. People would like to think that. People like to think that, well, maybe when she was left at the Biltmore lobby, she made some phone calls, maybe. But it's very unclear. So that's as much as I know about that question. Okay, let's see here. Famous skeptic Joe Nickell did a piece on Betty. Have you read it? No. I honestly, I don't know who Joe Nickell is. I avoid true crime. I have a lot of Google alerts out on Black Dahlia stuff, which is how I know about Skull Girls and all this other stuff. But no, I don't know. And unless anybody is willing to do a lot of original pick and shovel work on the Black Dahlia case, all they're going to do is scrape the internet and recycle Wikipedia. So I have no interest in that. Okay. Let's see. Okay. What do we know about Elizabeth Short's dad, Cleo Short? Are there any writings on him? He seemed like quite a character, having faked his death and left his family. The way he came across in James Ellroy's novel always got me curious if there was any more writing on him beyond mentions. Um, okay. A little biography of Cleo Short. Okay. Um, Cleo Short and Phoebe, Elizabeth Short's mom, met. I think they met after World War One, and they got together. They got married, and had a bunch of kids. They had these 5 girls. With I think it's 5 girls within 7 years, but they were somewhat. They moved around a lot. It's not like Medford was their hometown. Not at all. Um, they moved from Maine to Massachusetts and back to Maine and all over the place. Once Cleo abandoned the family, then and his last job was he was working for the city of Medford. I think he was in charge of highways or the road system or something like that. Um, so that was his last job before he ditched the family, and he took off and kind of roamed around the country, to the best of my knowledge. And then there was a contact between um, Phoebe and Cleo, where he was working out because he was experienced as a like a carpenter's mate. He'd been in the Navy, and he was apparently very mechanically minded. So he worked in the Navy Yard out in at Mare Island, which is in the Bay Area. He was working there. It's a shipyard. Um, and so Elizabeth Short came out to live with him in the Bay Area, and it was he was living with another because remember during World War II there was a tremendous housing shortage, and so you lived wherever you could find a place to live. You had a huge amount of the population influx, and so Cleo was living with another machinist at Mare Island, and the wife in this couple had a baby, and so that meant there was the couple who were living in the house, and then Cleo and Elizabeth Short, and then the baby. And so what happened was the woman's mother came up from Los Angeles to help with the new baby, and Cleo and Elizabeth Short then she gave them the keys to her house down in Los Angeles, and she lived. The house is gone, but she lived. It's now part of the University of Southern California campus. It was right off of Vermont Avenue, and they lived in this house for a very short time, like a week or two. And Cleo and Elizabeth fought, and then she took off. She went up the coast to Camp Cook, and was at the camp for I don't know, 9 months, something like that, and then quit her job. She was working in the PX at Camp Cook. Quit her job. Camp Cook doesn't exist anymore. It's Vandenberg Air Force Base or Space Force Base or whatever. That was Camp Cook at the time. She was there. She quit her job, and she ended up in Santa Barbara, and she got arrested for underage drinking and got sent back to Phoebe, her mom, in Medford. As for Cleo, what happened to him? Cleo stayed in Los Angeles, and he, at the time that Elizabeth Short was killed, he was working as a refrigeration mechanic. I think the shop was on Pico. The original detectives went out and talked to Cleo, and he was very uncooperative. It's in Boxie here, the police narrative, where they went out and told Cleo. They went out looking for Cleo, and they found him. And they knock on his. You go to his apartment, and Cleo is just plastered. And so they told him, "Sober up, come down and see us," and he did. And the news photographers were there. There are photos of Cleo. I think he's perched on a desk, something like that. But there are news photos of Cleo at homicide. And then After that, Cleo exit stage right. Um, did he kill Elizabeth Short? No. To the best of our knowledge, he didn't know. He didn't know that she was even in town. There was such a break between the two of them. So, you know, beyond that, if Cleo Short didn't kill Elizabeth, then I don't care. You know, it's like what led up to this break between the two of them. I care about that, but what he did afterward, I'm really not interested. Um, he was in L.A. until he died. I forget now when he died. I think it was in the 60s. I think I have his death certificate somewhere. And I'm relying on my memory. I think he died in the 60s. I think. Um, but beyond that, it's just, there's so many people and so many moving parts of the Black Dahlia story that you have to just be ruthless and say, I don't care. That's irrelevant, and just keep moving on. Let's see. Let me scroll back here. Who is Felix, the photographer that worked with Will Fowler? That's Felix Pagel, Paegel, an experienced photographer with the Los Angeles Examiner. His son Tom was a news guy. I worked with his son Tom Pagel at the Los Angeles Times. I was researching about Finis Brown and Harry Hansen, but there's not much about them online. Do you know much about their lives or who they were as cops? Any other notable moments in their careers? Finis Brown was Thad Brown's younger brother. Thad Brown was a very highly regarded official within the Los Angeles Police Department. He became deputy chief, and it was finally down to the competition to be LAPD chief was down between William Parker and Thad Brown. And you had the Thad Brown faction within the LAPD and the William Parker. So Finis was kind of Thad Brown's younger brother. He came to the LAPD somewhat late. He didn't become a police officer until I think he was in his 30s, something like that. Again, I'm relying on my memory. But he worked homicide for a while and then went on and did other stuff and retired from the LAPD. And he moved out of state. He moved to Texas and is now dead. Harry Hansen, on the other hand, by the time Harry Hansen was assigned to the Black Dahlia case, he had been with the department for 21 years already. He joined the LAPD in 1926 and had worked all over the LAPD. He had worked, robbery, burglary, uniform, records. When he was assigned to homicide, he had just worked 6 months as a uniformed sergeant in Central Division. So he had a ton of experience. He had worked all over the place. And Harry Hansen was the one who really kept the Black Dahlia file, the Black Dahlia case, until he retired. I think it was in 1968. Again, I'm relying on my memory here, but I think it was in the 60s. I think it was in 1968. I think. But he was the lead detective on that case from the day he went to the crime scene until the day he retired. And he was a seasoned detective. I talked about Otto Stephen Wilson. Well, Otto Stephen Wilson was one of Harry Hansen's cases. He and another partner, because they always worked with partners. So Harry Hansen had the Otto Stephen Wilson case. And then he had another really interesting case before the Black Dahlia case, which was the Louise Pete case. The Louise Pete case is amazing. Louise Pete was a housekeeper. And wouldn't you know it, she shot her millionaire employer and buried his body in the basement. Oh, oops, how did that get there? Anyway, she went to prison, but California didn't execute women, or they were squeamish about executing women. Only a couple of women were executed in the state of California. So she became one of them because after she got paroled, Um, she got befriended by this lady, and was paroled to her, and the woman was supposed to file regular reports on how Louise Pete was doing. Well, Louise Pete's signature miraculously changed. So Harry Hansen and one of his partners went out to check on Louise Pete. And sure enough, Louise Pete had once again killed her benefactor and buried her body under an avocado tree in the backyard. Well, Louise Pete had killed her last victim. She went to the gas chamber, and Harry Hansen did believe in the death penalty. He was a strong supporter of the death penalty. He went to Louise Pete's execution, and he said, "I believe in the death penalty, but I never want to see another execution." Yeah, I think there were 4 women executed in the gas chamber. Barbara Graham was one of them. Louise Pete, I think, the Duchess Spinelli, I think, and there's maybe Ma Duncan. I think Ma Duncan was executed in the gas chamber. I think. Again, I'm referring to I'm relying on my memory here. Not many. California was squeamish about executing women in the gas chamber, but Louise Pete was one of them. Okay, let's see here. Has anyone identified the 2 men that Elizabeth was photographed with on a beach in Florida? I've seen the photo over the years with one of the men cut out. Were they interviewed after her murder? That's an interesting question. Okay, what are we talking about here? When after Elizabeth Short was killed, the newspapers and the police got her scrapbooks, her photo scrapbooks. There were a lot of pictures, and it was sort of this feeding frenzy between the police and the newspapers as to who was going to get what. And they just ripped her scrapbooks apart. And so some of these photographs were published, and these photographs in question are of Elizabeth Short and another woman named Marge Dyer on the beach in Miami. I think it's Floridians, forgive me. I think it's Miami Beach. Anyway, there are pictures of them with these 2 guys, and the question is, all right, and the pictures were published in the newspapers, and the question is, were these men ever identified? They were never identified publicly. That doesn't mean that the police didn't know who they were. The police had a tremendous challenge in tracking down all the men, and they were mostly men, all the people in her so-called address book. They found, I would say, 98% of the people who were in her address book. There were 1 or 2 they never found, but most of them they did. And also the people in her photographs. That was part of their job. And so I think the police knew who they were. I'm not sure they were ever identified publicly. The photographs were printed, were published in the time. I think it was in the Daily News. Again, I'm relying on my memory. They were never publicly identified, but I think the police knew who they were. Okay, let's see. Oh, wow. Has anything more been discovered about... Okay, okay, hang on a second here. Okay, let's go to a live question here. Is it true that Cleo Short worked with many golf courses? Yes, that is true. He was involved in miniature golf courses for a while. That's absolutely true. Yes. Eugene, I missed your question. Is it true that the procedure done on Elizabeth Short was a hemi-demi corporectomy? Okay. That is Steve Hodel bullshit. That procedure did not exist in 1947. Steve Hodel will tell you, oh yes, that procedure was taught in medical school when my father was... No, it wasn't. No. That procedure didn't exist in 1947. That is all Steve Hodel bullshit. No, no. On the other hand, they do know, and when I say they, I mean it comes from Harry Hansen. It comes from the medical examiner, Frederick Newbar, that whoever cut her in half knew how to do it. It was a skilled bit in the a skilled, pardon me, a skilled piece of surgery. So they knew whoever cut Elizabeth Short in half had surgical skill. They knew that. But was it a hemi-demi corporectomy? No, it was not. Okay. Let's see. Has anything more been uncovered about Alexandra Partika, her background, interviews with her family, etc.? Okay. Who is that? Alexandra Partika was a partner in the surgical practice of Walter Bailey. And I think, just to make it very short, I think Walter Bailey is an excellent suspect in the Black Dahlia murder for a couple of reasons. First of all, he lived a block from the crime scene. Second of all, he was a surgeon. Third, and this is the kicker, the families knew each other. His daughter was friends with Elizabeth Short's older sister. So that is who he is. Anyway, Alexandra Partika was his partner. And after he died, there was a big fight between his widow and his partner over part of his, I think it was the contents of his office, maybe, his surgical practice, that kind of thing. And that generated a lot of paperwork. Anyway, after Walter Bailey died and the kind of dust settled over this huge fight over Walter Bailey's estate, Alexandra Partika left town. And if you want to do the homework, you can go into the medical directories from the 1950s and 60s and 70s and whatnot to see where she was and whatnot. I do have her death certificate. She died, and I talked to her. She had an adult guardian because she died with she had Alzheimer's, and so she died in a care facility, according to her legal guardian. She was blind, deaf, and had Alzheimer's. So it's not like I was never going to interview her. She was never talking about that. So, I mean, that's kind of the thumbnail sketch of Alexandra Partika. Okay, let's see. Do we know if he was engaged to the underground? Okay. Underground, Walter Bailey doing abortions it's one of those things that I get all the time. And people have the notion that, yeah, every doctor in Los Angeles, if you listen to Steve Hodel, yeah, every doctor in Los Angeles was doing abortions. And, somebody asked, did you know they used to be illegal? Yeah, I lived through Roe versus Wade. I'm 73. So yes, I remember when abortions were illegal. I do know that. Not at all. There is nothing to indicate. First of all, there's nothing to indicate that Elizabeth Short was pregnant. That's part of the medical inquiry. No, the medical examiner. No, she wasn't pregnant. But second of all, there is nothing to indicate that Walter Bailey was doing abortions. Now, he was he had been chief of staff of county hospital. So no, he wasn't doing abortions. No, that's just, no. Okay. Let's see. I'm curious about what happened to the trunk that Elizabeth had before going to Los Angeles. Okay, that's another great question. What am I talking about when I say Elizabeth Short's trunk? Okay. In the summer of 1946, Elizabeth Short left Medford to come to the West Coast. And she had with her luggage, 2 suitcases and a hat box. And she also had like a steamer trunk. Okay. Now she could take the suitcases and the hat box on the bus with her. She didn't take the train. No. She took the bus. She didn't have that kind of money. So what she did was she shipped her trunk from Medford to Indianapolis. And you're going to go, what? Yeah, we don't know. The best I've got a fairly detailed photograph of the receipt from the shipping receipt where she sent her her trunk. And as far as I can tell, there's a house number but no street name or something like that. Anyway, she shipped her trunk to Indianapolis. Why? I don't know. She stopped it. She left Medford. She's heading for Los Angeles, and she stops in Indianapolis for a while, like a week or two. Why did she do that? I don't know. I don't think anybody knows that other than Elizabeth Short. My guess is that it involved money because a bus ticket across the country was expensive. So what she did was she shipped the trunk to Indianapolis. She was there very briefly. She got her picture taken with this guy. And that's why it's important. She put the pictures in the trunk. And so when people said later, oh, I know, I recognize that that they checked into our place. It's like, no, they didn't, because that picture was in her trunk. That's from Indianapolis. That guy, and he was identified. He was in Indianapolis. So what happened next is she went from Indianapolis to Chicago. She stayed there for a couple of weeks and then came out to Los Angeles. And somewhere in transit, the trunk got lost or misplaced or whatever. And so she never had it in her possession in Los Angeles. It was in a Railway Express office or in storage, whatever. She never picked it up, so she never had it. So no, she had the trunk. She shipped the trunk from Medford to Indianapolis. She must have shipped it to Chicago and then out to Los Angeles, but she never picked it up. So that's that, and it was only recovered after she was murdered. And then the police and the newspapers got the trunk. They found out where it was and they got it. So, but she never had it. Okay. Let's see. Over here, I think Hodel likes to portray LA as a lot seedier than it actually was. Yes, that's true. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Sid Zaid, who delivered Short and Graham to Hansen's bungalow, is a blip on the radar. Do we know anything more? Do you know anything more about his involvement in Short's story? A little bit. I'm not sure how Sid Zaid met. And what am I talking about here? Okay. Elizabeth Short comes out to Los Angeles and she hooks up with this guy she knew in Florida, Gordon Fickling. And they come up to Hollywood. And while Gordon Fickling and Elizabeth Short are in Hollywood, she runs into a woman that she worked with in Massachusetts. Okay, Margie Graham. They waitressed together in Cambridge. Okay, so Elizabeth Short and Margie Graham get together. Gordon Fickling out of the story. He goes away. And Elizabeth Short and Margie Graham get together. Margie Graham is waitressing. She's working as a car hop at, I think it's Harry Carpenter's Drive-In, okay, in Hollywood, sort of on the east end of Hollywood, Anyway, but Margie Graham is sharing a place with a woman named Lynn Martin. And so Elizabeth Short comes in, and the three of them are staying there. And they get thrown out of there. And so Lynn Martin exits stage right. She goes away, except to appear later on in the novel by James Ellroy. And Margie Graham and Elizabeth Short kick around LA. And they somehow meet Sid Zaid, who has a teeny little house. And he introduces Margie and Elizabeth Short to Mark Hansen. End of Sid Zaid. He never has any more contact with them. He's out of the story. So that's really the end of Sid Zaid. He was around, but I mean, the rest of his life is really immaterial. If he didn't kill Elizabeth Short, it doesn't matter. Okay, is it true that Short was fascinated by true crime stories in the papers? The only thing that we know of, And of course, this gets into the whole, I mean, this is a short answer to a great big question. Was Elizabeth Short obsessed with the Suzanne Degnan case, and did she try to pass herself off as a reporter? No, that's all Steve Hodel bullshit. No. Well, yeah, no, that's not true. Crime sold papers. Newspapers sold crime. We do know for pretty certain that the Los Angeles Examiner, which was the morning paper, was a Hearst paper. It dealt in a lot of crime and scandal. It ran a little box score on the front page every day of how many car thefts and burglaries and assaults and murders and all that stuff. And it's reasonable. We can be reasonably certain that she saw the Examiner. She saw this box score on the front page because it's likely that she referred to it in a conversation. But beyond that, we have no way of knowing. The thing that we do know is that Elizabeth Short had an act. Well, she had a number of them, but one of Elizabeth Short's acts was that she was from this very fine Boston family who was shocked at the way things are done in Los Angeles. Isn't it terrible? All the crime stories that they put in the papers. Isn't that just horrible? That was her shtick. It was not, it's not at all what you think when you have the idea of what Elizabeth Short was like. No. And we have reason to believe, because a number of her people, a number of her acquaintances referred to it, is she would pull the act of that she was from a very fine upper crust Boston family, and she was shocked at how crude and gross and whatnot everybody was in Los Angeles. That was one of her acts. Not true. She wasn't from a fine Boston family at all, but that was one of her acts. So, okay. Let's see. Why were Elizabeth Short's teeth so decayed? Well, two reasons, I would say. Maybe three. First of all, prenatal care, just a guess. It was kind of the time. It was nothing in those days to have people routinely had their teeth pulled. Unlike now, I mean, we take good dental care for granted, but in the 1920s and 30s, it was nothing to have all your teeth pulled. So what she did was she would plug. She had cavities in her teeth, and she would plug the cavities with wax, which is a trick. If you've ever played with hot wax, it's not as easy as it sounds. Anyway, the dentists that I've talked to say that would have accelerated the decay. Plugging that decay with wax would have only accelerated the decay of her teeth. But they do know from the inquest, the medical examiner said the teeth were badly decayed, and some of them were loose or even knocked out or missing, what have you. Okay. Let's see. Are there any full transcripts of the grand jury trial in the 1949 online? No, there are not. No, not to my knowledge, there are not. There are. I have put the George Hodel bugging transcripts. Those are all online because you can't trust what Steve Hodel says. He cherry picks the quotes. I have put all of those online, but beyond that, I don't think I put anything else online. I put the excerpt of the Frank Jimison report that says George Hodel was eliminated as a suspect. And of course, Steve has to do a lot of fancy footwork to explain, oh no, he wasn't really eliminated as a suspect. Well, yeah, he was. Okay. But the entire file, well, Boxie's a lot. There's a lot in there. And so no, it's not all online. Let's see. Now, a couple of people asked about this question. They remember a TV show I did, and I don't remember which one it was. I've done so many. But there was one that was hosted by Joseph Wambaugh. If you don't know who Joseph Wambaugh, Joseph Wambaugh was an LAPD sergeant. I think he was a sergeant, and he started writing books. And he wrote The Blue Knight and The Onion Field and whatnot. And he got in a lot of trouble with the department for, I think it was the Blue Night. I forget, but I think it was the Blue Night where he got in a lot of trouble with the department for not showing them the draft of the manuscript before it was published. They didn't care for that. So Wamba went on to write a whole bunch of books. And anyway, the high concept of this was that he would host this TV show. And the concept behind that was that, oh, well, here are all these theories, and Joseph Wamba, the police sergeant, is going to knock them all down. And so I think I don't remember, I think I had a minute or two to explain the Walter Bailey, my research up to that point, which again was a long time ago. And it's like, Walter Bailey was too old. He was too feeble. He couldn't do it. Get out of here. And I don't put a lot of stock in that. I later did an interview with Joe Wamba, and he was fine. It was just a shtick for the TV show. We had a nice conversation. It was a lot of fun. I asked him if he talked to James Ellroy lately, and he said, no, I haven't talked to James lately. So anyway, that's kind of what I have to say about Wamba. Yeah. Let's see. Okay, Instagram, I'm going to have to cut you off in a couple of minutes here. Perhaps Short and Steve Hodel had more in common than he would like to believe. Neglected children desperately in search of esteem that a stable childhood offers. Yeah. That would be good for the Steve Hodel thing in a couple of weeks. I'm doing that one October 29th. Okay. Let's see. Did Elizabeth Short ever go to the Frolic Room? The Frolic Room likes to say that she did. Whether she really did is probably not. But the Frolic Room likes to say that. It's good publicity. You'll find that a lot of people will say, oh, well, the Black Dahlia was seen here as sort of a publicity thing. And I think that's kind of what's going on with the Hotel Cecil, although the Hotel Cecil really doesn't need publicity these days. But no, not really. Elizabeth Short, regardless of what the femme fatale film noir tropes, she didn't drink. She didn't go to bars. Her mode of operation was the drugstore lunch counter or the coffee shop lunch counter. And if you think about it, it makes really good sense. If you're a young woman in Hollywood in the 1940s and you want to meet guys in a fairly safe setting, where are you not going to go? You're not going to go to a bar as a single woman. No, you're not going to do that because bad things happen in bars. And she wasn't that stupid. But what she would do is she would go to the drugstore soda fountain or a restaurant lunch counter. And why is that? Because she could sit there and nurse like a cup of coffee or whatever and get a constant turnover of guys and meet guys. And so that was much more in her comfort zone. The drugstore lunch counter, something, or the soda fountain, something like that. Certainly not bars. No. Okay. Let's see here. Okay, what happened to Mark Hansen's notebook? Did he give it to Elizabeth Short or did she steal it? She stole it. What am I talking about here? I am talking about Elizabeth Short's so-called address book, which was, in fact, Mark Hansen was Danish. And so his story was that, yeah, I went to Denmark and I got this pocket calendar. And I had it just lying around as a souvenir. It had his name on it, Mark Hansen, and it had the year 1937. And so he had it just sort of lying around as a souvenir. And he claimed that he didn't even notice it was missing until it turned up. What happened to it is Elizabeth Short took it when she was staying there and used it as an address book. It was really a pocket calendar. And she used it as an address book. And then after she was killed, the killer stuck it in an envelope with some other things, birth certificate, snapshots, business cards, stuff like that, and mailed it to the Examiner. It's the famous envelope addressed with cutout letters. Okay, her so-called address book was that, and a whole bunch of pages had been cut out, numerous pages, and everything. Pardon me, everything had been soaked in solvent of some sort, alcohol, kerosene, something like that. And so she took the notebook, the so-called address book, this pocket calendar. She just took it. She lifted it, and she would. It's not organized at all. It is a hodgepodge, and I think it's probably the best kind of indicator of how disordered her personality was. That it is just a mess. It's not alphabetical. It's not chronological. Of course, a lot of it's missing, but what's there, what still exists, is just a hodgepodge. Some people are entered multiple times. There were times when she would hand it to somebody. She would treat it like an address book and say, "Hey, would you, write your name and phone number in my address book?" She did that too. So it's just a mess. And a lot of guys who were married didn't give their real names. Red Manley is a great example where he said his name was Robert Morris, not Robert Morris Manley, but Robert Morris. So he used kind of a fake name, and then he used his work phone number rather than his home number, and that was not unusual. So that was kind of the story about her address book. But she took it, and he didn't know it was missing until the killer mailed it to the Examiner, and it showed up in the papers. That's the first he knew about it. Okay. Let's see. How did police identify Betty Bersinger as a caller? Well, she wasn't identified on January 15th. She wasn't identified until later. Instagram, 1 minute countdown. Betty Bersinger was not identified on January 15th. Here's the story. What am I talking about? Betty Bersinger, and I interviewed her. She's the woman who found the body. And what happened was that, of course, there are no cell phones in these days, and the whole block is vacant. So what happened was she sees the body of Elizabeth Short. She's got her daughter in a stroller. Her main thing is to make sure that the daughter never sees the body of Elizabeth Short, and she assured me, nope, my daughter never saw the body. Regardless of what you read elsewhere, that's what she told me. Anyway, Betty Bersinger goes down the street to where there are houses, and she starts knocking on doors of houses until she finds somebody who answers the door. And she says, "I need to call the police." And so, okay, Instagram, you're going to go goodbye. So, she calls the police. "I want to report blah, blah, blah." And according to what she told me, and this is borne out by police reports and news accounts of the time, the officer wanted to know, what number are you calling from? And what she told me was, "I looked down at the dial on the telephone." If you remember the rotary dial phones, I looked down at the dial on the phone, and I read off the number of where I was calling from. He didn't ask for his name. He didn't ask for her name. He asked for the number that she was calling from. So she gives the number, and then she goes about her business. She was heading down to a shoe repair shop. So down in there's a plaza down on Lamert Boulevard. So she goes down there, and then she said, "I walked back up along Crenshaw." And she said, "I could see what was going on over at where I had seen the body. I could see the police activity, but I didn't want to get involved. It was, lunchtime. I wanted to get my daughter home. She was sick, blah, blah, blah." How they ultimately identified her, I'm relying on my memory here. As far as the Bersingers were concerned, there was a whole thing about the third or fourth day in the papers of, they were looking for Betty Bersinger. And so she finally called up. That's one version of the story, that she saw that they were looking for her. And so she and her husband, John, went into the university division and talked to the cops. I think it was. I think they went to university. I'm relying on my memory here, but I don't think they went to Central Homicide downtown. I think it was the local headquarters, which was university division. Okay. Let's see. Why wasn't Walter on the suspect list? I don't know. I wasn't living in 1948 or 47. I don't know. Is the professional building of any significance? Well, the professional building is gone. It was torn down years ago. There is, I think there's condos there now, but it's gone. Let's see. That's going to be a long answer. That's going to be a long answer. Let's see if I can find something. Oh, you know what? It's 11 o'clock. I guess I'll wrap it up here. Is there any book you'd say is reasonably similar in tone or style to what you're writing? Is The Five a decent comparison? Kind of. I mean, the difference between The Five. Okay, what am I talking about with The Five? I recommend a book called The Five by Heidi. I think it's Rubenhold. I think is her name. I'm again relying on my memory, but it is all about the selected victims of Jack the Ripper, and it uses their but it stops almost moments before they are killed, so you know all about their life up to the it's a terrific book. It's a great example of research, and she traces the lives of these women up to pretty much up to the moment that they are killed by Jack the Ripper, whether it's bedding down in an alley or whatever. And it's fascinating. It is a fascinating look at just lifestyle of that time. I mean, if you really want to know how rough it was and whatnot, and the fate of women, if they weren't single women, if they were divorced or whatever, it's great. But somewhat, the first part of that is it's different because it's a lot more immediate. And I live, I live pretty much where it happened. So it is, and again, that's a fine piece of writing. If I could do that kind of a job, I would be very pleased with myself. She's a great writer. And it's going to be different because I'm writing about the 1940s, not about Victorian England. And I will point out that Hallie Rubenhold got raked over the coals by the Ripperologists because they want all the blood and gore. So that is but I have nothing but tremendous respect for The Five and for Hallie Rubenhold. It's a great book. Okay, guys, we ran over a couple of minutes. I will save these questions for next time and add them to the already long list. If I didn't get to your question, I'm sorry. There were tons of questions. Anyway, there's a George Hodel session on October 29th. And the next Black Dahlia session is November. Incredible. November 5th. Again, Halloween's coming up. Don't dress like the Black Dahlia for Halloween. Don't do it. No. Okay. And with that, have a great couple of weeks. And George Hodel on October 29th and Elizabeth Short on November 5th. See you then. Bye-bye. Say goodbye, Boxie.